Great, Marianne, let's go ahead and get started.
Sure, thank you. Welcome everyone to the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking webinar on some of the ways Catholic sisters journey with survivors of human trafficking. I'm Miriam Mueller, a Felician sister, and I'm the chair of the Education Working Group for U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. And I'm going to go over a few logistics before we begin. As Jennifer mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and you will be sent a link to the webinar in a few days. During the webinar, you'll be muted and in listeners only mode. However, we do value your input and any questions you may have, and these will be addressed during the last 20 minutes or so of our time together. To pose a question or a comment on what's being discussed, please use your question, the Q&A box. And also on your screen, you'll see a small box that states either speaker's view or gallery view. And you'll want to be on speaker view in order to see the PowerPoint slides throughout the webinar. And so I'm going to begin our webinar with a short prayer. God, thank you for this time together as we explore how to journey with survivors of human trafficking. We thank you for the courage and the gifts of our presenters, Dawn, Jean, Kathlyn, and Teresa, as well as the gifts of each person present on this webinar. As we spend this time together this afternoon, please show us what is ours to do so that no child, woman, or man will become a victim of trafficking, and all peoples will treat those they encounter with respect and dignity. And so I now hand this over to Jennifer Raisley, the Executive Director for U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, who will introduce our presenters. Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Marianne. And thank you to all of our attendees and panelists for joining us today to learn more about how Catholic sisters are making an impact in the lives of survivors of human trafficking. It is my joy and pleasure to serve as Executive Director of U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. For those who might be attending today who aren't quite as familiar with our organization, I did want to start with just a short introduction about who we are. We're a faith-based national network with members all throughout the United States, focused on the work of ending human trafficking and supporting survivors. And we do this through three main areas: through education and prevention, through advocacy, and through direct support of survivors. Currently, our membership includes over 100 congregations of women religious, along with dozens of other individuals and coalitions throughout the country. We're the U.S. member network of Talitha Kum, which is an international network of women religious working to end human trafficking together. And we welcome anyone who has a heart and a passion for this work to end human trafficking and support survivors to join us. You can learn more about our work and membership on our website, which is sistersagainsttrafficking.org. Today's webinar will be focused on the role that Catholic sisters have had and continue to have in accompanying and supporting survivors of human trafficking to be thrivers. We have 4 wonderful panelists today who will share about their work and experience, and then we will open it up to questions from the audience. As Marianne mentioned, you can submit questions at any time through the Q&A box, and all questions will be addressed at the end of the 4 presentations. We anticipate this webinar running about an hour and a half, and it is being recorded, and the recording will be available after the presentation as well. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker today, Sister Jean Schafer. Sister Jean has dedicated the past 17 years of her life to the work to end human trafficking and support survivors of human trafficking. Part of her legacy includes the creation and publication of the monthly Stop Trafficking newsletter, a publication that educates people about the crime of human trafficking in its many forms and advocates for changes that address the needs of victims and the elimination of human trafficking throughout the world. While engaged in this work, Jean has also co-founded and co-directed Hope House, a home for women coming out of situations of enslavement in California. Sister Jean has served as a member of the board of directors for U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking since we were founded in 2015, and was part of the planning team prior to that. She's the former chair of our Survivor Services Working Group and recipient of the Sister Margaret Nackey CSJ Bakita Award. Sister Jean, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I see in the chat a lot of familiar names. Wish we could see the faces, but I just feel like I'm among many friends. Yesterday, we had a major outage here in Citrus Heights, where I live. So no internet service, and they said maybe tomorrow morning it'll be on. So I was imagining myself in some Starbucks or some church pew giving my little presentation, but fortunately the service came back on this morning, and here I am in my home in Citrus Heights. Talking about sisters collaborating with survivors, I want to take us way, way back in our work against human trafficking. The slogan years ago was hidden in plain sight. Unfortunately, I think it's still something that is a reality today, although we have made much progress, and we'll be hearing a lot about that during this webinar. But I want to give two examples of my own ignorance. In the 1990s, I was serving in leadership for our congregation in Rome, and we're international. We have sisters in 27 countries, so I was traveling all over the world. And I never heard or saw anything that would say to me human trafficking. Let me give you two examples. One, I was in Taiwan. We had Chinese sisters living there. They were very elderly, so we wanted to improve the community life, and we brought Filipino sisters to live in the community, strengthen the community, but at the same time have a meaningful ministry. And in the town where our sisters were was a garment factory. So we went to the garment factory, and all of the employees in the factory were Filipino women. The factory was surrounded by barbed wire. I didn't think anything of it. We talked to the gentleman in charge, and they talked back and forth in Chinese. So obviously we didn't know what they were talking about, but we were trying to say we could have sisters come and actually work with the women in the garment factory, or we could come in periodically for spiritual support. And they talked back and forth. And finally, they brought a Filipino woman in, and we explained to her what we wanted to do. And she said, "Oh, thank you very much." She said, "We're very happy here, and we don't need any sisters to come into the factory." So we were disappointed, left, and moved into another dimension of ministry for our sisters. A second story that I can share, I was in an airport in Sri Lanka. We were in a large waiting room for the flight that would go to Dubai in the Middle East, and then I would move on to Rome. In that waiting room, there was one Nordic couple, husband, wife, and myself, and the rest of the room was filled with young Sri Lankan girls, I would say, and young women. And each one had a huge suitcase. And I thought to myself, where are all these young people going? And it looked like they were going to go for a long time. Again, total ignorance. As I look back now with the knowledge that I've gained over these years, these were potentially victims of labor trafficking and perhaps sexual trafficking, moving into work settings where they were either trying to make money for their family back home, or they were launching some career, but they had no idea the potential danger that they might be in. So hidden in plain sight. Now let us go on to look at a little bit of the history. As I said, this term came up first back in 1998. Sister Leah Ackerman, a missionary in Africa, was pleading at the international level to say she needed help to minister to many Kenyan women who were coming into Italy and being exploited sexually in various parts of Europe. She founded an organization called Solidarity with Women in Distress. This organization still functions today. One of our sisters works for that organization in Austria. But the turn of the century, 2000, both the United Nations and the United States set out laws that addressed this very problem and targeted also the victims to find ways to help these victims. 2001, we had our triennial meeting of the Union of Superiors General in Rome that is attended by about 800 leaders of women religious communities around the world. And this topic came up of exploitation of women and girls. I tell you, and I highlighted it in this PowerPoint slide because it was a Pentecost moment. We were sisters speaking every language, coming from every country, living our religious life in different ways. And yet on this topic, you could feel the solidarity, the determination, the energy to say we have to do something public about this problem. And so it was the first time in the history of the Union that we put out a declaration. And I'd like to read you just a portion of that declaration that launched everything that we've done since then. We intend to work in solidarity with one another within our own religious communities and in the countries in which we are located to address insistently and at every level the abuse and sexual exploitation of women and children, with particular attention to the trafficking of women, which has become a lucrative multinational business. All those sisters went home and found ways to help their own members begin the journey of educating themselves and others about the plight of human trafficking and its victimization of women and children. And later we find out many men as well. So as Jennifer mentioned, Talitha Cum was formed, the Union of the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Trafficking was formed. And today, as she mentioned, we have in Talitha Cum 51 networks in 92 countries, and we have many, many congregations joining the coalition here in the United States. And I must urge that many individuals and religious orders of men and coalitions can also become members, because the more we are together, the more effective we are. Next slide. So years ago, if you mentioned human trafficking, people said, oh yeah, I know, that was sex work in Thailand. And then after the TVPA came into place in 2000 in the US, people said, well, let's focus on the big four states where we have a lot of people there for trafficking. But today we know that this is happening in our own zip codes. It's happening online. And yet, as I mentioned in the beginning, it is still hidden in plain sight. Our work is not done. Now, the United States focused on the 4 Ps: prevention through education, protection of the victims, prosecution of the traffickers, and particularly it grew in awareness partnership, that we need one another in order to be as effective as possible. And so social service agencies realized they need to collaborate with law enforcement, vice versa. Many coalitions formed, and through that, we have our U.S. Catholic Sister Coalition. So what were we doing? We were doing, as Jennifer mentioned before, education outreach everywhere, anywhere, as much as we possibly could. We were advocating for good laws and for the enforcement of those laws and modification of laws to make them improve their effort to find and aid victims of trafficking. And we were reaching out to these victims in various ways. And as we moved through our experience over the years, we realized we must partner with survivors. Next slide. So we are engaging with survivors and thrivers, both on the Survivor Services Working Group, which is one of the subgroups within our coalition. And we are also forming an advisory council of survivors to influence everything that we do as U.S. Catholic Sisters. We're also trying to find ways to mentor these women because they have a long journey from being a victim to becoming a survivor and a thriver. So they need moral support and advice and encouragement and so forth through mentoring. We need money. Because we have houses that have many financial needs, including the direct needs of the women themselves for education, for transportation, for healthcare, and so forth. And then we need groups to help us find potential employment or apprenticeships to get scholarships that these women can become more and more educated and so forth. Currently, one of the things that we are doing also, which we have just become aware of, is the fact that many women who are currently incarcerated, either in jail or prison, through sometimes no fault of their own, but the collusion of having been involved in prostitution and therefore perhaps in drugs or other crimes, they're imprisoned and now they have no support system when they get out. We know the problem of racism in our country. We know the problem of the housing crisis in our country. And so when these women are about to be released from prison, and sometimes they're released quite unexpectedly, where do they go? Where do they have a house? Where do they have a support system? Where do they get a job in order to make themselves safe and reliant? So what we're doing is trying to educate ourselves on this problem and to educate prison chaplains, law enforcement, criminal justice, and so forth, to help be aware that pimps are literally recruiting women in prison by saying, I can provide money for you, I can provide housing for you when you get out because I care for you. And the women are desperate or naive, and so they fall right back into the traps that they were in before. And so this is something that we really want to target in the future. Next slide. Housing. This is one of the main ways that we have tried to help women, because as we went around and raised awareness about the issue of human trafficking and victimization, social service agencies kept saying to us, we need housing. Putting a woman who had been trafficked into a domestic violence shelter is not enough. She needs a long-term transitional setting which is safe, which is stable, and in which she can heal in so many dimensions of her life. And we're going to learn more about the healing process further in this webinar. So the houses that member congregations are operating under the U.S. Catholic Sisters come in various models. We have some where the sisters live in the home with the residents 24/7. And that was the model that we used in our Hope House that we had for a number of years and have passed on to another group. But we helped the women in whatever way we could, but the services were outside of the house. So the women would go to their services outside and they would come home and live with us, and we would give them whatever support they needed. Another model is where there are staff on site during the day, and the sisters who live there go out to their own ministries during the day and then come home in the evenings. And there was one instance that is a member of our coalition where the mother house, the congregation gave rooms in the mother house to women who were under the direction of social service agents and caseworkers, and then a sister advocate to help those women with whatever they needed at the time. But it was not a community setting in the same way as these other models were. In addition to that, sisters are doing street outreach. They have drop-in centers. They're working at other shelters operated by social service agencies as volunteers, answering the telephone, or many other services. And then sisters are also accompanying women as survivors and thrivers. They're accompanying them in a spiritual way, and we'll hear more about that in this webinar. But now I'm either going to turn it back to Jennifer for another introduction, or on to Kathlyn, because she's going to put some flesh and bones on what it's like in a shelter. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you for that great sort of overview of the history of sisters working to address human trafficking in general, and then all of the specific work and many ways that Catholic sisters with our network in particular have really been involved in accompanying survivors and supporting them to become thrivers. So thank you for your role in that. Next, it is my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Sister Kathlyn. And sorry, just pull up my notes here. Sister Kathlyn Mccully is a Dominican sister of Springfield, Illinois. She taught junior high and high school and spent 13 years in pastoral ministry in Peru before serving on her congregation's leadership team for 10 years. She has recently become executive director of Bethany House of Hospitality in Chicago. Bethany House offers a welcoming home and support services for young women seeking asylum in the US. So Sister Kathlyn, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm going to try to start my PowerPoint, hopefully. So I'm a Dominican sister of Springfield, and just this month became executive director of Bethany House, but I have been working here for about a year and a half as a house coordinator, a ministry of presence to the women during the day and evenings and overnights on weekends. Bethany House began born of a small group of compassionate women responding to the human need, not only trafficked victims, but young immigrant women seeking asylum. There were women from 12 congregations that gathered in February of 2017 and recognized the need of young women's turning 18. They can be in the children's shelters until the age of 18, but on the day of their 18th birthday, they are moved into adult immigration detention if there is not an alternative for them. There were several months of planning and preparing the legal documentation. And by October of 2017, Bethany House of Hospitality welcomed its first 4 residents. Initially, we could house up to 10 in Bartlett, Illinois. Last December of 2019, we moved to Chicago and now are able to have 15 women and some with children. Today, it's 30 women's congregations and 5 men's congregations who offer the primary support to Bethany House, along with many associates and friends and grants that we are able to receive. So Bethany House offers, as Sister Jean just mentioned, housing, education, employment, We offer legal services, not through Bethany House itself, but through pro bono attorneys that work with various agencies in which we're in partnership. But we try to offer our young women seamless access to the services that she needs. The duration of stay, I saw someone ask in the chat, we average 6 to 10 months in the stay here, but sometimes it's a week, and we have a couple of residents who have been with us for 3 years now. Accompaniment in the complexity of the immigration system, which can take years. Referrals to ESL, high school or GED classes, or college level programs when appropriate. We try and encourage and support the women as they seek meaningful employment. Most are able to get their work authorization a year to a year and a half after being in this country. And so then they are ready to look for work. And that's often when they're also ready to leave Bethany House for a more independent living. Instruction and guidance, mentoring for the skills essential for independent living. Almost all of the women who come to Bethany House have been referred by the shelters from the Office of Refugee and Resettlement Services. That means they came as unaccompanied minors and were put into the children's detention system until they turn 18. So that social integration and just learning the skills for independent living. Our women are 18 to 20, 22 years old here at Bethany House. And general support, instruction in becoming good leaders here within the house and within American society. 3.5 years after that beginning, we've served 54 women with 11 children from the ages of 4 months to 16 years old. The 16-year-olds were under the guardianship of an older sibling. Women from 18 different countries, survivors of war and domestic violence, trafficking, gang violence, and LGBTQ persecution. And again, the average stay from 6 to 10 months. Many of them are fleeing trafficking either in their home country or here in the United States. So that's where we make the connection with Sisters Against Human Trafficking. Some have been sold into, or were under threat of being sold into forced marriage in their home country. And that was part of the reason that they were fleeing. Many were brought to the US for a modeling job or a promise of other work, and then virtually imprisoned in forced labor. They were able to escape. One in particular, I think of, she escaped and went to the police and then became the primary witness in the court case against that trafficking ring. Some have been lured into prostitution, all too often. Sold by a friend initially, a so-called friend, or promised citizenship through marriage, an arranged marriage. Several have come from oppressive labor situations, the hours, low pay, threats to expose their immigration status, or threats to their family members. And those labor situations have been at all stages of their journey, both before they left their home country, along the sometimes months or years long journey to get to the United States, as well as once they're here. And virtually all of the women who have been at Bethany House have had encounters with human smugglers. It was part of their journey to get here. Our immigration system is really a broken system. We, for the last 25 years or more, have relied on deterrence as immigration policy in this country. And that really only incentivizes the use of more dangerous routes or the use of human smugglers. It forces desperate people to find other ways to get to a safe place. People who are coming to the United States most often don't want to leave their home country. They have to. They're forced by desperation to flee. The militarization of our borders and those of other countries, for instance, asking Mexico to get to the southern border, that militarization doesn't stop people who are desperate. It only forces people to find other routes that are more dangerous and that often increases their vulnerability to trafficking. There's an exception made. Title 42 was established last year, or 29, out of our, particularly at our southern border, but to keep people out of the country during the COVID emergency. It was called a public health emergency, and virtually no one was allowed into the country during 2020. We had maybe 3 people come to Bethany House newly over the course of the year, and it's because they were already in the children's shelters and turned 18, but virtually no one coming from the border because people were being immediately turned back and sent back to Mexico. Under the present administration, and since January, we have seen an attempt at a more humane response at the border by allowing an exception to Title 42 for unaccompanied children. In theory, allowing children in was trying to be helpful, trying to offer shelter to young women or children that needed a home. But it's really led to only to new forms of family separation. What's happening is that parents try to enter as a family with their children, and when they can't do that, then in desperation to provide a better life for their children, they often send the children alone across the border. And that leads to not just human smugglers, but an entire system of people being taken, paying to go across the border, but not always getting there safely. People being left behind because they couldn't travel fast enough with a group. And then again, vulnerable to trafficking or anyone who comes along. We hear the numbers of people who are kidnapped, both on the southern side of the border and on our own side. We were expecting a young woman last week. She had just arrived. She and her 2 children had been part of the Remain in Mexico program and waiting there for the last year and a half. When she was out to a clinic for a doctor's appointment before leaving Texas to come up here, she disappeared and hasn't been heard from since. The pastor down there of the shelter where she was staying with the children has been searching for her, but as yet we have not heard anything about her whereabouts. So it's not just the lack of safety on the Mexican side of the border for those waiting. It's also once they get here to the US side. And that new forms of family separation that force children to come without their parents, and then parents to maybe try a more dangerous route, again, with smugglers, with traffickers, with cartels, is what we're seeing most recently. This slide is not so much to see the details of the numbers, but the light blue that you see there represents family units processed under normal immigration law. You'll see during 2018, early 2019, families being processed under the laws of our country. Once COVID began and Title 42, the dark blue represents those who are not even being processed. People are not even being allowed to request asylum in our country. They're simply turned back at the border. Now, these numbers, and the same is true over here on the second one with individuals being processed under normal immigration law and under Title 42 being expelled immediately. And that's women of all ages, races, family units, etc. This entire process is exposing people to greater danger than they already face in the terrible process journey of coming to the United States. We see a couple of positive signs. There is a reduced time in children being held in Customs and Border Patrol custody for lesser time. It's gone from more than 100 hours in March to 24 hours or less for the most part in what we're hearing. There are also fewer children in Customs and Border Patrol custody, from 5,500 in late March down to 750 or less in most recent days. So that's a step in the right direction. But 750 children in conditions no child should have to face is still far too much. We're also seeing quicker reunification time with their families, which is a hopeful sign. It's gone from about 42 days to 30 days. But again, 30 days in a shelter where there are hundreds or even thousands of children is setting those children up for dangerous encounters. The phasing out of long-term family detention is beginning to happen. Families are beginning to be released. And so we're seeing more calls directly from the border, whereas before our children came from children's shelters most often. Now we're getting more calls from the border, and it's women with children. We still tend to accept the younger women, so most of them have younger children, are those that are coming to Bethany House. What we see needed is a recognition that the so-called crisis at the border is really a humanitarian crisis. It's a worldwide crisis that's forcing people to leave their homes and be exposed to trafficking, as well as many other dangers on their travel to this country. We need a shift in investment in family reunification rather than a focus on detention. At this point, detention is not a deterrence to people. And so we need to focus on the family reunification as a humanitarian issue. And finally, to strengthen the immigration courts. Women that are awaiting asylum tend to be too often exposed to or vulnerable to trafficking because they may wait 4 to 5 years for immigration hearings. We had an 18-year-old with us a couple of years ago. In 2019, she went to her scheduled hearing in her application for asylum. The judge was not prepared, and her lawyer said, I sent all this paperwork to you a month ago, but the judge was not prepared. And he said, you'll have to just come back. The next opening on my docket is in 2023. Now that was 2019. And this woman is expected to simply wait to hear something from her asylum case. So it's that kind of long times waiting that make women desperate enough to go out on their own, and some have returned to prostitution rings or the only means of support that they've known in this country. We're sad to see that happen. We try very hard to vet the family members that say they're going to take a woman from as she leaves Bethany House. but we know that sometimes poor choices are being made. We are not a detention center. The women are free to come to Bethany House and free to leave, but we do try and offer mentoring that is going to help them not turn to boyfriends, so-called boyfriends, who may be looking to use them for other purposes than what they promise. This is just a quick picture of a COVID time picture of some of our young women as we celebrated a birthday. But we need the help of all of you in order to continue Bethany House and continue to offer shelter to young women, those who are trafficked and those in danger of being trafficked here in this country. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sister Kathlyn. And thank you for helping us to understand these intersections of migration and, refugees who are entering this country, applying for asylum, and the many dangers that they are exposed to related to human trafficking, or the human trafficking dangers they experienced in their own country, which pushed them to search for safety and opportunity here in this country. One of the things that we try and do as a network in relation to our education and prevention is help people understand those connections between different types of systems. And so I'm so grateful for the work that Bethany House is doing to serve these women, and also for you helping to educate us in understanding how these many different realities are related. Thank you. So we just heard an example of, what some of the housing support looks like for survivors. As Sister Jean mentioned earlier, another big part of our work to support survivors is in education, and offering educational scholarships to support survivors pursuing, their interests in pursuing higher education. And so I'm thrilled to welcome our next presenter on the panel, Dawn Schiller, who was one of our recipients of an educational scholarship. Dawn is currently the Director of Training with LA County Project for the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, or CAST. She is an expert survivor leader in the anti-trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault movements. Dawn was abused and trafficked on the streets of Hollywood in her teens, and subsequent years of struggle to survivorship, education, and service to others now offer valuable firsthand insight to community advocates. She is a national speaker, educator, consultant, and author. Dawn earned her undergraduate degree summa cum laude in 2012 from Eastern Oregon University with honors in communication and gender studies. She received the Women of Vision and Courage Award from the EOU President's Commission on the Status of Women. She is a Phi Kappa Phi Kathleen Greery Fellow and received a teaching fellowship from Oregon State University, earning her Master of Arts in Women's Studies in 2020. Dawn is a Visto volunteer and regularly visits the girls in Los Angeles juvenile halls who struggle with substance abuse, sharing her experience, strength, hope, and recovery. Welcome, Dawn. It's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, what an honor to be here. Thank you, Sister Kathlyn and Sister Jean, and all the work that the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking do. Thank you for reading my very long, short bio. We have to create these things as we go along, but what an honor it is to have a bio that reads that, knowing from whence I came and where I'm coming from a human trafficking experience. I want to kind of just go through a little bit about my journey and how the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking helped me to finalize my master's degree and recently be hired as the training director for CAST. And so I was trafficked when I was 15 years old, and Sister Kathlyn put it in her presentation by someone who was 32, who I quote unquote thought was a boyfriend. And so my whole experience, and this was in 1976. And this is really important from my perspective to share, because I have these years of experience of lack of services to try and help folks understand where the gaps were for someone like me, and really be appreciative of the services that are here today, but know that we are nowhere near finished. So that trafficker was an abuser. First started out as a pedophile, seduced me. I thought it was my boyfriend, and he completely took control of me. And so if anybody works with domestic violence, this is completely a power and control wheel. We have the human trafficking control wheel, very similar. And this was the dynamics in my world at the time. He controlled every aspect of my being. It turns out that that happened, and that went on until 1981, when I got away from him. And he did also labor traffic me, which we're learning today is called labor trafficking, but he also had me selling drugs for him, and he got me addicted. So, and that's a big part of my story, and it's a big part of survivors' stories as well, and victim stories. And because he got me involved in criminal activity, which I thought that was another reason why I could never go to law enforcement or anybody to help me. So he used that as a barrier to keep me trapped, and also, continued to get me addicted. I relied on him for everything, but I finally turned him into the police in 1981 after a huge police search for him, and he was trying to drag me into other things, and I thought I was safe. And I reunited with my father, who I didn't realize at the time was also very pro prostitution, and he was also a pimp in his own way. And he almost immediately took me into a strip club and had me audition, and while my father was there in the audience. And that was the world that he said this was acceptable, this was good. So I, following my father, I followed him to Southeast Asia, where he in turn trafficked me for another almost 5 years, sorry. In 1986, I returned to the United States after having been trapped by the Yakuza in Japan and trafficked by them for a short period of time. Well, it seemed long to me, but I escaped, and I made it back to Oregon, to my mother's home. And this is a big part of my story, and didn't know I was completely lost. In 1986, there was no language for anything that I had gone through. There was no understanding from society that I could see. My family didn't understand what I went through. I couldn't tell them. I was completely, in my view, unable to share the depth of that trauma and pain and guilt that I was bearing. I went on a retreat to Mount Angel, Oregon, and fell in love with the Benedictine sisters in the Queen of Angels Monastery, who welcomed me with open arms, and spent a year there contemplating vocation, thinking this was a good place. And it was a good place for a whole year, although it wasn't the end of my story, because I was never able to tell them. Now, in 1986, I could not share any of this. This was my guilt, my shame, my remorse. All of that had been put on my shoulders. It was my fault. All of that happened was my fault. And it was damaging me inside. And also, I had not dealt with, although I was abstinent from any kind of alcohol or drugs for that whole year, I had not dealt with the nagging burn of an addiction. And I didn't realize that either. Long story short, I got some really wonderful support there and healing, but I didn't go into the vocation. I went back to Los Angeles and tried to work in regular jobs, although I started drinking, and that started to, again, tear up my life internally. I had no counseling, could not tell anybody about my story. It was as if my whole youth up until I was 26 years old, I could not share. I couldn't think about anymore. I had to completely block it out in order to be a human in the real world. This is an impossible task. It was impossible for me. That eventually ended up a lot more drinking, a lot more bad relationships, a lot more bad decisions. And I ended up homeless for 4 years in the 90s and addicted to IV drugs. So I was, at that point, it was 1998. And I, through grace, what I call grace, was introduced to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And yes, it is an anonymous program, but I share it for myself. And I stepped into sobriety and into counseling, into PTSD therapy, and into service work. And this is where I eventually started to heal and live in my own skin, dealing with my past with the help of counselors and support, and sharing in increments, because there was still no language around human trafficking at that time. But I knew that I could I belonged in the domestic violence, sexual assault world. And so my service work started to happen there. And I eventually was accepted at Eastern Oregon University. And because I had this burning desire, it was so important for me to find out why. Why had that happened to me? Why? What was it about me in particular that put a green light over my head that told this man that it was okay to commodify me, to use me and abuse me? And it was there that I discovered that it was not just me, that it was a whole group of a population of not just young folks, but folks who were vulnerable, who were oppressed, who were invisible from society, who were on the margins of the world, that were vulnerable to many, many other people who did this and made lots of money off of hurting and abusing folks. From Eastern Oregon University, I was driven. I was driven with a purpose. And if you know anything about survivors and resilience, the idea of having a purpose, of turning around a past that is you can't visit it, you can't accept it unless you can turn it around. And that was my story. And so I knew that I was on the right path. I was on the right path to try and find out why. And then the next thing I wanted to know, how can I make a change? And the opportunity came that my work at Eastern Oregon University, became highlighted at the folks at Oregon State, and they offered me a teaching fellowship. And I stepped into that and absolutely thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It was a rigorous program. And I delved further into understanding the systems of oppression that exist in this country and in the world, and understanding, the root causes, and then how to change those root causes in order to do sustainable help for folks. And from there, with my volunteer work, I became I became more able to share and to consult and train. And it started segueing that I began doing that kind of work as well. So I do also consult with the Department of State, the Office for Trafficking in Persons. I consult with the Department of Health and Human Services and with the Office for Victims of Crime. And I've been doing that for a long time as well. Gosh. I didn't think that, so back to grad school and how the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking helped me. I was almost finished with my work, and my father, who was my pimp at a time, was elderly and disabled and died suddenly. And that sudden death was 6 weeks before I was to graduate. And I had to leave the scholarship that I had with still 6 credits left in order to finish and to defend my thesis. And I thought, oh my gosh, that entire rigorous work and teaching and everything that I had gathered to be able to go out and be a better advocate was going to go to waste because I couldn't finish and I couldn't afford it. I was in Los Angeles. I moved to Los Angeles and became a member of CAST, which is the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking, their survivor group called Resilient Voices in 2016. And it was CAST that said, I told them about, well, I almost have a master's. I don't quite have it. And to be honest, if you don't quite have a degree, you can't really apply for those jobs that require that level of work. So they told me about the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking and their scholarship program, and I was able to apply. And quite frankly, you responded almost immediately, and I can cry because it was so important to cross the finish line and to validate all that work, and to be able to say, yes, I'm able now to turn it around, to turn all of that pain and suffering and abuse around and help others in a more meaningful way, in a way where I can bring in that breadth of knowledge, that breadth of experience and mentoring that I've done over the years, and use it to its fullest. And so I did apply this year in the beginning for the Director of Training program. Oh, sorry. The scholarship was able to pay for those last 6 credits. I successfully defended my thesis in June of 2020 via Zoom because we're in the middle of a pandemic, but that's okay. It was all good. And then this year I was able to apply for the Director of Training position, and CAST has welcomed me with open arms. And I cannot be more excited to be in a place of employment that, it's not work if you enjoy it. And I'm telling you, I enjoy this work. It's meaningful. It builds on my resilience. It allows me to help those to inform those who are helping others, and to help those who are still struggling. I don't know where I would have been if I had gotten services back, when this happened to me. But I do know that my year at the Benedictine Sisters, with the Benedictine Sisters, really did instill the sense of service and giving back that was really kind of a foundational element of my journey, my continued journey. Even though I struggled with sobriety, afterwards, it was an element that was built the foundation of my continued journey of helping and advocating and being aware of the world and the struggle that a lot of folks go through. I know that was kind of long and a little intense, but it's always just so meaningful for me to be able to share this journey. And it's rare that I get to say thank you, but I'm really here to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Dawn. It's really been such an honor for us as an organization and as individuals who've gotten to know you a little bit over the last year, to get to partner with you in this way and to be a little piece of your story, and just the incredible work that you're going to continue to do in the world. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and allowing us to be part of that journey with you. Our final panelist today is the newest team member of the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking staff. Theresa Flores is our new program director, and I'm so thrilled to have her on board and to be able to work alongside of her. Prior to working with us, Teresa worked as the founder and director of the SOAP project, and she has also been a licensed social worker for over 30 years. Teresa is a survivor of domestic child sex trafficking and was sold in an underground crime ring in an upper middle class suburb outside Detroit from the time she was 15 to 17 years old. She has researched the mental and physical health problems of over 200 domestic trafficking survivors and has hosted over 100 women at survivor retreats. She's received many awards, including the 2017 L'Oreal Women of Worth and University of Dayton's Alumni Association Christian Service Award for her work with the SOAP project. In January 2012, at the State of the State address, Ms. Flores received the Courage Award from the Governor of Ohio for her work in human trafficking. She's published 5 books, including The Sacred Bath, The Slave Across the Street, and Slavery in the Land of the Free, a student's guide to modern day slavery. Welcome, Teresa. We're so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. I am so honored and blessed to be a part of this amazing organization. So as Jennifer explained to everyone, I am a survivor of human trafficking as a teenager. And I will say that my faith helped me during that time of being trafficked. It helped me actually survive what I was going through, the trauma. And it was actually the only thing that they couldn't take away from me at that time because they owned everything else. But then later in life, my faith is also what helped me heal and thrive. So it was such a pleasure to be able to develop retreats for survivors. As I got older, as like Dawn said, I was able to find those words of what happened to me and able to share that with others, because that is, like she said, such a difficult thing that takes years and years. And so I had gone to one retreat my entire life. It was actually at my parish, and it was a women's retreat. And I remembered later how that retreat made me feel. And it just kind of naturally came to me is that this is what survivors need to be able to help them heal, and then also to be with other survivors, because most of us, at least before these past few years, had never met another survivor. We feel like we're the only ones that have ever gone through this. And to really meet other survivors, and we call each other sisters. You wouldn't really want to be in this sisterhood, but we're glad that we have each other. And we don't have to even like say words, we just get it, you know? So I created these retreats, and actually we're up to about 300 women that have come through our retreats. And I wanna share with you a little bit about them, because a vital part of our retreats is are the sisters that help us with these retreats. So it is really essential, like I said, to have these. And we also want to have them be mind, body, and soul. You need to have all three components to heal trauma. It's really, really essential. You can't just do it on one or the other. But you also have to be really careful when you're trying to help survivors heal, that we don't re-trigger them, re-traumatize them. And that's one of the most beautiful things, I think, working with sisters, is that they walk beside one another, a survivor. You know, they walk right beside. They don't, they just accept the survivors for where you're at in the moment. And I think that's why it's been so successful. So speaking of healing, we heal of mind, body, and soul, and we do it through counseling. And this is all associated with the SOAP project. We also teach them basic living skills. A lot of them were trafficked by family members, and they didn't have a mom that necessarily taught them how to write thank you cards, right? How to balance a checkbook. So we really have to start at the very beginning. And during those retreats, we help them do that. And we develop survivor mentors as well. Mentorship is crucial because then it continues even after that weekend. We do some fun activities with them for their body, Tai Chi and Reiki. Self-defense is really important because we just had a retreat last year, and one of the survivors said, I finally was able to scream no. And it was such an empowering moment for her. We do things like massages. 99% of them have never had a massage. And it's so crucial on healing your body, but also on accepting positive touch too. Many of them we have haircuts, and lots of them haven't had a haircut in years. They financially, we found that about 65% of our survivors are living below the poverty line. And so we try to provide them everything for free as well. These are some of the things that we have sessions on self-love, identity. We offer spiritual support. One of the sessions we've had is how to heal through Christ, empowerment, healthy relationships, and really trust and forgiveness is our biggest topics to talk about. The forgiveness part, I mean, you know, how can you talk about forgiveness if you don't talk about God? And so, our retreats are not what I call, they're not Christian retreats, but they are spiritual retreats for sure. So they are spiritual, they're faith-based, and they accept everybody from wherever they come. So we have had survivors that have attended that have not been had any faith, have been very anti-faith, because several of the ones that I've had at our retreats were actually trafficked by pastors. And so we accept that, but we also want to show them why we do this. We do this because it helps us heal, right? And we do our ministry because we're called to do that. So I'm not shy about that, but we accept everybody. Everything is done by option. They can choose to attend a session if they want, and if they don't want to, that's okay too. One of the things that it's so important that way we have our sisters attend these. They help me with foot washing ceremonies. And if you've never had a foot washing before, gone through a ceremony, it is probably the most humbling things, just so filled with love. One of our dear sisters for the Dominican Sisters of Peace in Columbus, she's come several times and done a beautiful presentation on the woman at the well. And these survivors, it doesn't matter if they're Catholic or not, they absolutely love that. And the survivors just show them grace. And for many survivors, this is the first time they've ever really, truly felt the grace of God. We have our lots and lots of art that they just love to do. We've had a drum circle every year. We try to do a drum circle. And when we were at the Adrian Sisters, the Weber Center in Adrian, Michigan, we had several very elderly sisters in wheelchairs come and just sit there and participate and sing along with us. And then one of the highlights for the survivors is we have a group of women that come from Cleveland, Ohio, and they have a high tea for the survivors during it. And, we take so many things for granted, and being able to be served, have choices, and to be pampered is something a lot of people take for granted. But these women are treated like princesses, and they should be. And so I have a nice story of a survivor who attended the tea and then went home, and I saw on Facebook she posted a picture of her having tea with her 9-year-old daughter after that and sharing that experience with her. The women that are in Cleveland, they shop all year long for teacups and saucers, and each survivor then is able to take home her teacup and saucer with her. And I just love looking at my collection of teacups because it reminds me of that time. Here's another picture of our drum circle. It's actually a sing-along as well. And at Tai Chi, we like to teach the survivors ways to relax. We typically have a lot of anxiety and depression. And so these techniques help a lot, doing yoga with them and different kinds of relaxation meditation. Usually we do our retreats at convents. So the survivors love to do it there because it's so peaceful. They might not even know, the statues and the things that are around, but they automatically makes them feel very peaceful. And then they ask us what they are, and it's a great opportunity to educate them on it. So typically they're held at convents, but this retreat here was one of our advanced church retreats, and we went to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. We had an amazing sponsor, and we took 18 survivors who were very advanced on their healing, but you always need something. Our healing is something that's constant. It's not like you're done and over with, it's a journey. And so we went to the ocean there at this all-inclusive retreat. Like I said, we talked about some really tough things, like how do you have a healthy sexual relationship ever again after this? We were able to have those deep conversations there. So one of the survivors who attended that is Joyce Haskett from Michigan, and she was sentenced to life in prison I wonder if I have a picture of her. She was sentenced to life in prison for killing her pimp. And luckily she got out after 17 years. And she went on this retreat with us, and the smile on her face just made everything just so worth it, to help her with her healing. So I'm going to go back to this. So a couple other things about the retreats. One of the things that we have the sisters that help us with a lot is praying for them. You know, we get a lot of attacks, spiritual attacks, when we do something for survivors and in this field of human trafficking. So prayer is super important. They also write notes of encouragement. So we love to get packages of encouraging notes and just, hey, we're praying for you and good job. And we put those on their pillow every night during it. And it's so wonderful just to know that somebody's thinking about you. We've had sisters in Toledo and Columbus that collect toiletries, journals, Bibles, little things that we can give to the survivors that they take home with them to remember it. Other thing that really big thing is that we've had a lot of sister communities donate money to us to help us do these. We've been really blessed by a few communities to help us pay a huge amount that it costs us to run a retreat. We pay for every survivor's plane ticket. We take away every barrier that might prevent them from coming. We don't charge for these retreats. There's, as far as I know, very few, if any, completely free retreats that are therapeutic for survivors that are free and actually pay you to get there. So we pay, it's generally about $350 a plane ticket. We fly the survivors to us. And then it costs us about $400 for a weekend retreat per person. Generally, we have about 24 survivors that are new to us and a few returning. So we have about 30 survivors that attend our retreat. And then we usually have at least half of that, so about 15 volunteers that come and do sessions and just help us with different things. So it costs me about $20,000 for one retreat. But you know, you cannot put a dollar figure on somebody's healing at all. We're looking to start to do an all-alumni retreat because they all connect with each other afterwards. We have a private Facebook page and they all connect with each other on there afterwards. And so they really want to come back together again and see each other because they're coming from all around the country. So right now I'm attempting to raise $40,000 to have a retreat that'll be for 50 to 75 survivors. And we're also always looking for locations to have this at. We've done it, like I said, in Adrian, Michigan, Ann Arbor, Columbus many times, because that's where I'm from. And in Punta Cana. So we're open always to any place, especially if it's donated. And then volunteers. So many of you have amazing skills and things to offer and talents. And so we have on the website, soapproject.org, an application that you can apply to volunteer and present a session. And that's also where the application is at, Dawn, if you want to attend the retreat too. So yeah, so, you know, sisters are so crucial to helping survivors heal. I could not do any of this without them. And I'm so happy that I don't have to. So like I said, they've also done really neat sessions. The woman at the well, like I said, is a favorite, helping with the foot washing. You know, we have sisters that are lawyers, right? That are in so many different fields. And so utilizing their services, and even if you're not a sister, you know, we can always use help. Because we want more and more people to walk besides them. We had one survivor that said, you know, I didn't know that anybody cared. And so showing them that there are people out there that care and want to help them in their healing is so crucial. Because it's very sad. I mean, you see John and I here, but it's very sad because we're rare. We're very rare. Most are not as healed as we are. And there's days where we still struggle as well. So, you know, we want to be able to help those other survivors because they're human beings and they're worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It was great to hear about many of the ways that sisters have supported those retreats and accompanied so many survivors that you've worked with over the years. And we're really excited to be looking at planning our own retreat for survivors, maybe in 2022, with all of your wonderful skills and experience. So thank you so much. We do have about 15 minutes left, so a good chunk of time to get into some questions for all of our panelists. I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. I know kind of as questions were coming through, sometimes people already addressed some of them. So let's go ahead and start with, I like, you know, the first question we kind of got in was this question for churches, you know, around why aren't more priests or pastors speaking out during their homilies about how pervasive this issue is, how each parish can become more aware to support and assist in addressing this issue. So I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that question or ideas, but, you know, for those listening at home, how can they help encourage churches, you know, to learn more, to get more involved, encourage their priests to be talking about this more? Or if no one wants to take it, I can do it. I can offer a few ideas too. Jean?
I was just going to say, U.S. Catholic Sisters is trying very hard to get religious orders of men more involved in their role in helping to fight anti-trafficking. And I think if and when religious orders of men get, you know, directly involved, that will filter off into the parish life of the parishes that they are responsible for. The pulpit is a powerful venue for getting the message out. So I think any justice and peace organizations that are alive in parishes, if we can get our foot in the door to give presentations to those members and get those members to encourage their pastors to speak on this topic. Because I think one big problem is pornography. And it's very prevalent online. It's luring children in. It's breaking up family units. It's causing domestic violence. So, you know, there's a whole web of problems that are interconnected with the phenomenon of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And then I also think male religious and men in general could do much more in the labor trafficking realm, because labor trafficking goes on in many, many business venues, supply chains, small contract companies and so forth, banking. They're just, you know, a huge realm of areas where men could have a powerful influence. So I think we have to challenge our brothers you know, around the world and in the United States to really get involved and to find their own way and their own place. But I think without the involvement of men, we lose ground. So we very much need their participation in any way possible.
Hey, thanks, Jean. There was a question that came through about if we as U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking have a hotline number available or planning one. We don't. What we promote is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So that's something good for, you know, everyone to know. If you don't already know the National Human Trafficking Hotline, it's widely available on our website on pretty much all of the materials that we put out. Because they're the ones with trained staff and resources to be able to respond to those reports. So we really encourage and promote the National Human Trafficking Hotline. We had a question about, you know, how do victims and survivors find our organization, your various, you know, houses, organizations, networks. You know, how are people, when they reach out to you or getting connected, how is that happening?
Again, I would say use the U.S. Catholic Sister website, because we do have the houses listed there with the contact information. And then most of the member-sponsored houses have their own websites. I'm sure Kathlyn and many other member houses would be very, very happy to connect with people who are interested in helping at the local level.
Yes, I can put the website for Bethany House in the chat. Most of our young women come to us, though, through other agencies, either the shelters at the border or the agencies that are doing the child care for young immigrants.
Yeah, I put our organization in the chat as well, soapproject.org, SOAP, which stands for Save Our Adolescents from Prostitution. And anybody can apply to attend it if you're a survivor. They don't need to be referred by anybody. We do check references though. And people can apply, females only for the retreat, and female only facilitators can apply to do a session or help out.
Yeah, and I know, as Dawn kind of highlighted in her story, so often survivors get connected to us through other organizations that we partner with or who are familiar with us. So CAST out in LA, who's a great collaborator and partner, has recommended our educational scholarship to a few survivors that they know. Oftentimes too, other sisters who are part of our organization who work with survivors, will encourage them to follow up with us to ask for whether it's an educational scholarship or if there's other financial need that we might be able to help and support with. So we really rely on our members, and partners contacting us, letting us know where is there a need, how can we help out, where can we join and support. So, we really welcome spreading the word, having people reach out and contact us in ways that we might be able to collaborate and support. Great. There was a question about, are there certain locations in the country that are more in need of shelters than others? I'm curious if anyone has a sense of that, areas where there's a gap in services, where there aren't shelters like Bethany House that already exist, where there's a need.
I think they're needed everywhere.
Absolutely.
I was going to say
And big
that
cities are always in need.
Yes. I know at CAST we have 2 shelters, one for emergency and one for transitional, and it's not enough. It's just not enough. And we are at the moment all women identified folks. And so what does that say to folks with children? There's not a place that CAST has. So yeah, there's a lot of needs, and a lot of needs that need to be nuanced for housing, especially, and for, the care services.
Also, and maybe the survivors want to comment on this, but traditionally, domestic violence shelters would have beds available, but they found that that type of a program does not really meet the needs of traffic survivors, because when they come into a home, they're not survivors, they're still victims, and they still need to go through this long process of healing and stability and building self-confidence. And domestic violence shelters tend to be like a 1-month stay, and then you jump out into some other setting, get your life back in order again. I think it's particularly challenging for the foreign nationals who are very weak in the English language. They, as Kathlyn was saying, they have legal issues that take a long time to rectify and so forth. So the traffic survivor needs a stable, long-term, safe place to really do all the homework that she needs at her own individual pace in order to heal and become stable and thriving. And therefore, wherever we were giving talks and so forth, people would say, we need housing, we need housing, we need housing. And then as soon as you say that, we need money, we need money, we need money, because it costs money to operate these facilities and to provide the staff and all of the resources that are needed. So housing is a big, big need.
Absolutely. Oh, go ahead.
We're just beginning a program called Beyond Bethany, because we recognize that even after spending 6 months or a year with us and being ready to, take that first step to greater financial independence, there needs to be strong support along the way, for some more than others. But something that offers that ongoing moral support and encouragement, a little boost along the way when needed.
Yeah, and you have to be really careful, opening a house. I mean, everybody's going to hear this and be like, oh, I want to open a house. It takes very skilled professionals to do that. Really getting a lot of trauma training is essential. We're sitting here saying we need more, but it comes with a big responsibility that we don't damage them more than they've already been hurt. So getting the proper training is essential, and it does cost a lot of money. As you can see, I think she had put on there that it was $750 a month for one survivor. So I know when I had started a home and it was $250 a day because there was minors, and it was staffed 24/7. And so it can be very expensive and require a lot of training. Not that I want to deter you from it, but just so you know that going into it.
Thank you all so much. Maybe this can be our final question, and I apologize to those who didn't get their questions answered live, but I think this is a really important one that someone was asking about demand, right? So we know that there isn't trafficking if there isn't demand. Can any of you speak to what's being done to curb demand, right? To address what is fueling human trafficking? And let's see. Yeah, I think that captures kind of the idea. What are we doing to really address the demand side of human trafficking?
I'll go.
Thanks, Dawn.
I'll go. I'll give you a perspective that talks to the root of why we look at women and women's bodies as, commodities and objects of ownership. Would really delve into a historical, embedded oppressive system of sexism, and how we minimize women's importance throughout in macro and micro aggressions, on a daily basis. We make incremental steps ahead, but historically we know that when we do better and we make a big step ahead, we get pushed back. So we have things like the Me Too movement, which is now like unveiling, right? So before we used to stay quiet, we used to be complacent. Sometimes we had horizontal hostility where, women even just supported the oppression of women because it was kind of a self-preservation type of an understanding. But until we really address that historical oppression that we have, embedded in our systems here, we're really not going to eradicate the demand. When we can educate folks that women and women's bodies are nothing for ownership, that we are individuals with equal minds and equal hearts and equal abilities, then then we can eradicate that whole you belong to me mentality. That's my
think also moving away from criminalization of the very, very human acts that are related to trafficking, not recognizing victims for who they are as victims, but criminalizing behavior is not helpful.
Right.
Yeah,
and that's true of migration also.
Yeah. I wanted to make a point too about the pornography as well, because I think that we are institutionalizing pornography. Almost like the question even comes up, and should porn be allowed in sex ed? That was on the news this morning. And if we look at the history of porn, it's absolutely oppressive in its violence against women in a lot of ways. And so this is actually, so are we saying now that we want to educate our youth, especially our young boys, into showing showing them this is how we have a relationship with women, a physical relationship with women is ownership. So it's very important that we pay attention to all of the ways that we're, perpetuating this type of oppression that trickles down to the folks that are vulnerable, who can't protect themselves, and then end up becoming victims of human trafficking.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the only way that we can stop human trafficking is by going after the demand. There's not enough homes or anything to be able to fully go after this. And we just need to just go after the demand, which is sex for sale. And the best way to do that is to strengthen our laws. Really getting behind legislation and within a local level and a federal level, and making strong laws against people that are buying sex is the way to stop this. Supporting the equality model is essential, where we do not criminalize the person that is selling sex, because we know that they're not the one selling sex, but we're actually making higher penalties going after the purchaser is the way to end this.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. I'm so grateful just for the stories and the wealth of information that was shared today. Thank you to all who were able to join us to learn more. And if you aren't currently a member of U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking and are inspired to join to partner with us in this work, we would love to have you. You can find more information about membership on our website under Join as a Member. And also, as so many of our speakers have mentioned, we're always in need of donations to help keep funding this work. So if you're inspired to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it. You can actually, when you're making a donation, specify if you want it to go to the Survivor Services Fund. So we have a separate fund that just funds like our educational scholarships, support for the houses that we collaborate with, direct survivor needs. And so you can specify in your donation that you want it to go to that fund to really support this work around survivors. And we wanted to end just by letting people know about our next webinar coming up. So Teresa, if you can share with people about our next upcoming events.
Yeah, thanks. So for members only, June 16th at 1 o'clock Eastern time, we have an amazing webinar that is on how children are being trafficked for labor in the United States. That's not something that we typically think of, right? But it is a very big crime here. And so we want to be able to educate you all on what those signs are and what we can do about it. So that is June 16th at 1 o'clock Eastern, how children are being trafficked for labor in the United States.
Thank you. Thank you all again for your time. And for all of our attendees, please stay on the lookout for a follow-up email that will include a survey about kind of what you learned and your experience on the webinar today, and then also the link for the recording.